You're listening to the Therapist to Millions podcast, where we get under the skin and into the brains of the world's leading therapists with Dr. Susan Spicer and myself, Damien Mark Smith, as we delve into the world of all kinds of effective therapies with fascinating and challenging cases, plus marketing tips and what's really working in mental health right now. There's something you said in the first part where you said that I can't remember whether you said that horses aren't therapists but it was something along those lines. She actually works with horses and they do therapy. And that's the second person now I've spoken with. And that her spirit guide is a horse. And she just went, oh no, horses just amazing for therapy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We use them for therapy as well. Incredible for kids with learning disabilities.
Yeah.
Or challenging behavior, autism, because so with autism, Asperger's, those sort of things, or even kids that are marginalized, they don't know how to relate to other people. Autism, Asperger's, they have real trouble with the emotional, understanding the emotions. Kids with challenging behaviors, they're always looking to the adult is what are they going to do? What are they going to blame me for? Or so there's a huge amount of judgment going on. But when you put them in front of a horse, that's not there. It can't be there.
Yeah.
So they have phenomenal results. And I was talking to a woman last week, and she's got 4 kids, and they're all on the spectrum at different points on the spectrum. And she said her best days are when they go to the yard with the horses, because the kids can relax. That's the challenge, because they get all stuck up in this and we all have it to a certain extent, but autism, that they really struggle to understand the emotions, their emotions, but other people's emotions. But of course, when you're coaching, the other person is going to judge you. I lived in Asia, and they still have the toothpaste ads with the guy comes on and he's in a white lab coat. Now, I know he's an actor, but the fact he's in a laboratory doctor's coat means that he's influencing the person watching it. I mean, that wouldn't happen here in the wet crew, where we're too sophisticated for that. It's just much more subtle.
Yeah. No, I love it.
Animals, horses. Absolutely.
Absolutely amazing. What was the book you pointed in my direction? I want to make sure I get it right.
Contempt to Curiosity.
Creating conditions. Oh, okay. So that's not the transurfing, is it?
No. This is the core of my work, which is clean language and emergent knowledge. That was David Grove. Now, Caitlin Walker's book is based in clean language as well, but that's about taking metaphor into business. Ultimately, when you're communicating, because the conscious is linear, thinking, critical thinking, it all comes from our front brain. Our unconscious doesn't have language, so it functions in metaphor. So what you're doing is a therapist it's called metaphor therapy. Yes, understanding the person's metaphor, because we all create metaphors. Our conversation on average it's 3 metaphors a minute, but when we're speaking, we create these metaphors in our unconscious, and then they come across the barrier into our conscious, and our conscious puts them into sentences, which is why we communicate 80% of the time or so.
Yeah.
You get a different culture, and of course the communication's completely different, because they're very different ways of building their metaphors.
Yeah.
When you take that into business, it can have some tremendous impact as well. In the book, she works with a business, just a startup, and they really wanted to understand what was going to happen with the business. And there was sorry, are we supposed to be following the questions? I'm going off the topic again.
You know what? We are going to go off the topic. I'm going to have an interesting time editing it, but I don't care.
Okay. So going into this company that she was working with, there was a couple, and they're not relationship related. They joined us to create this business, an IT business. And they wanted to really understand the sense of how they were going to create the business. So they took them into separate rooms and started running them through the process of, so when you're working at your best in this business, that's like what? So there's a couple of prompts there for you to go into a metaphor. That's like what?
Yeah.
So the woman was, well, we're going down a river and it's going reasonably fast and there's rocks and we can move around and you know, and we can slow it down a little bit and we can speed it up, but really, you know, we're in control of what's happening. Direction, to a certain extent, speed. So that was her metaphor of how she saw the business running. His metaphor was, it's a train speeding down the track. You know, this is where we're going. We know where we're going. We've got the goal, the destination. It's absolutely sorted, and that's where we're going. And of course, when you bring those two metaphors together, you can see there's going to be a problem.
Yeah.
They both had the same outcome, but very different ways of getting. How do you explain that? If you and me are sitting in the pub, that's not a conversation that's going to come up. And then the questioning and the interviewing is works on bringing these metaphors up so that you can really understand how you see your business running.
Yeah.
And so in business, in a business, so she worked with another IT company, quite a big IT company. So they had 6 managers, and they ran them all through separately to understand how they saw their division running in the business, bring them together so that they can all express their metaphors and how they saw the business running, and you could immediately see the clashes in the connections. And when you see the misconnection, then you can work on them and get a much better functioning company, so that each of the divisions in the company are supporting each other, but on a deeper level. So that when you understand where you are on a deeper level, when the other divisions, the other people, the other management are, you're more likely to be able to function as a team.
Yeah.
So really, really great results in business. But also, I mean, we all function metaphor, and then we try to communicate. Caitlin worked years ago. I think she started over 20 years ago, but her first big breakthrough was with marginalized children. Teenagers that were sort of on the cusp of being expelled. And she worked with them, and it's in the book, and it's a great story. I don't get on to why I was interested in it, but she had these kids, and so she worked on, so what happens, you know, when you get into a fight? Well, I see redness. Okay, so let's explore that. And there's a little bit of NLP in there. So the child was being allowed to create this metaphor themselves for when they get angry. And then the art is finding out when they get relaxed, when they're calm. And this particular teenager, well, I have to walk to work in the morning, and I haven't had breakfast, and I've got the same clothes on I had yesterday, so they're really in trouble, these kids. And the best place, the favorite place for this teenager was beside the pond and the park he walked through to work, because it was a nice relaxing blue. And so what she did is she worked with this particular guy so the teenager, so that he could understand that blue concept of being calm, and how he could take that when he was getting angry at school or with one of the other kids. She had a phenomenal result. The school didn't believe it. These kids were no longer marginalized. They were no longer creating problems. They were actually at the top of the class. Just because when they started to understand this red mind, this red emotion, this red feeling coming up, they could put something else in place so they can control their emotions. She was doing this 20 years ago. That was her journey, started with clean language. I sort of focused a lot on sports athletes. And if you look at the top athletes, they do the same things now. It's called a red mind, blue mind. Nothing to do with Caitlin's original work, but it's a color, I think, that comes up. You know, you get angry, you get red, calm is blue. So how can I, as a sports person or a leader, a manager, a parent, actually recognize that angry emotions coming up? What is it? It's red. It's like that. What other emotion do I need? Because when emotions and logic meet head on, emotions are going to win. So to be a high-performing athlete, you have to recognize, I'm going into an emotional, angry, I'm getting pissed off. I'm not thinking about the game. I need to do something on the spot to get themselves back into that blue mind setting, so they can be logical, so they can play the game to the best.
Yeah.
As a parent, you don't want to get angry with your children. You want to make sure they understand the point. They've done something wrong, dangerous, whatever. But you need to do it from a logical place, not an angry place, because youngsters do what we do. They don't listen to what we say. And if you're angry, that's what they've taken on.
Mm-hmm.
So they will manifest. That'll be a pattern they understand. So that, but you can give that to somebody. If you're a normal coach, we can work through that red mind, blue mind, and then partly, the coach has to be there. So Tony Robbins is very good at elevating emotions, lights, dance, loud music, dancing, energy, and then come in with the manipulation, the implant of that blue mind. The trouble is, people go away from a big energetic event and they have to go back a couple of weeks later or 6 months later because it hasn't held.
Mm-hmm.
If you work with the person, if the person's doing it themselves, working with their unconscious and they creating the metaphors for themselves, then they're their metaphors. They have full access to bringing that blue mind out. So in the story I was telling before about the horse, I'm sure that the thing that's going to come up with her is the metaphor of the horse. And from there, she's going to go. And now I could have told her to step into her vision, her future, her outcomes, goal setting, that sort of thing. But the horse did it for her. The horse has a phenomenal anchor because I didn't do anything. Somebody else didn't do anything to influence the situation. The horse did. But the horse can't influence the situation. It's a horse. So it's a great mirror. It comes back to the client. It's theirs.
So they create their own
principles. Step into the future.
So you are, in a way, I mean, you are essentially bringing the fundamentals of NLP together with the clean language and together with the emergent theory as well.
Emergence is something we haven't even touched on. Emergence. That's where the real fascinating, exciting.
But isn't the emergence the result for the person once they've kind of gone through this process? Isn't that what's coming out?
Clean language is a dozen questions and only reflecting what the client says. Emergence is meta driving it. So the power of six. We're connected to everybody in the world by six people.
Yeah.
In cricket, there's 6 bowls and over. The number 6 keeps coming up, and it's because the mind works in sixes. So if I'm asking you, one of the questions is, then what can happen? I can ask that once if I'm doing clean language, and then I'll go with what the client comes up with. If I ask it again, reciprocally, 6 times, it's moving to a different place. So if you have A and B and the outcome is B, a coach will go, so what's the goal? What resources have you got? What's the timeline? So they're going straight to B. By meta driving the question, they fill in the gap between A and B.
Give me an example.
When I'm giving when giving the example, is there anything else about that?
Got it. Okay. Yeah, makes sense.
So when got it makes sense, is there anything else about that?
And is that the meta process? What you're basically doing is kind of almost like giving a jetpack.
I'm processing you. 90% of our communication is non-verbal. So on that, so the process I would have just used now is to ask those 2 questions, and then I would have asked about something else that was coming up for you because you started to process unconsciously. There was lots of non-verbal communication coming across to me. Just from here up, if I'm face to face, I'm looking at the whole body, but there was processing going on there.
Mm-hmm.
So had we been doing a session, I would have left that longer because you were in the middle of a process going on there. So yes, so emergence
doesn't work so well on podcasts.
No,
half an hour gap.
Absolutely not. What we found fascinating with the emergence was it's measurable. So what happens is on the third question, so a retreat is 7 days, and we go through the process. So me asking you those questions is obviously a little wee short coaching session of 60 minutes maybe. On a retreat, it's 7 days. People on the first couple of days go into all they create the metaphor landscape, all the things that come up for them. So they're writing them or drawing them, however they want to express. So some people want to write things down, but other people want to dance. I'm working with a guy in Barcelona who's using the clean language process with his professional dancers. So when that's like what, how can you express that? To what he's asking there is, how can you express that in movement? So when you're going through a retreat, you're putting all these memories out there. When we have an emotional event, and in the post-conception in the womb, the first couple of years were essentially a blank sheet. Something happens, our parents have an argument. We can't critically think about young age, but we take on the energy, the emotions. Our mind starts to build patterns. Our mind doesn't remember images; it remembers the emotion. And what happens is, so if you're in a car accident, people go cold. Well, you can't destroy energy. Where's it gone? It's been hooked at that point, the emotions of it. So at that very young age, 1-2 years old, something emotional happens, and there's the emotion is held in place. So when we do these retreats, we're going through the first couple of days, understanding how their metaphor landscape, their genealogy, their whatever's affected them and created the character. And it gets to a point where these things start to collapse and this energy comes back in, and we measure people's heart rates. They flush, they heat up every time. Obviously, they're heating up, their heart rate's changing. They're reabsorbing. There's energy coming back to them from somewhere.
So it's been released.
It's been released. It's been held in place through your life with those emotional events.
Wow, that's amazing.
So that's what we're supposing is happening in the third or fourth day, and we call it the wobble. A person will physiologically be affected at some moment, and it's unique to everybody because we all have unique patterns. Those patterns that have held those emotions in place start to dissolve, and the emotions come back in, and we become closer to whole. What I'd say, we become closer to being authentic. Because we're starting to bring that emotion, that energy back into play, back into so that I can come from a more authentic place. I haven't got the shadows, my events that have happened in my life that are sort of being held there, that are affecting my behavior, still affecting myself, my behavior. Because if I've had a trauma. So little Johnny's sort of building he's 1 year old, he's got these Lego blocks, he built this incredible boat, and he runs up to Daddy and to show him this boat. Look at my boat. Well, Daddy's just sort of come home, it's Friday night, work's not going too well. He's not getting the bonus because times are pretty hard, and he's pissed off. He brings that home with him. So little Johnny's got this boat that he's really excited about, and Daddy just says, I don't want to see it. I just want to go and watch television. Well, little Johnny, it's not about the boat, it's about him. Now, millennial Johnny's sitting in the boardroom, and the boss comes in and slams his fist down and says, look, we've got to get this work done. The mind processes by looking around to see what it knows. We don't see new stuff, we compare with what we know. So the unconscious races around, and in this particular moment, it latches onto that event when the little Johnny was 1 year old. The behaviors come out, the feeling comes up, the emotion comes up. Now it'll be tempered, and obviously there's layers of onion, it'll be slightly different, it won't be the same, but that will have created the person that millennial Johnny is today from that event that happened when he was 1-2 years old with the Lego block, the little Lego that he built for his father.
So then when you go in and actually process this and then release the energy, so that those
client goes in, the client goes in.
You don't do it. So when that energy is basically reutilized, it's reabsorbed, it's kind of reused
into today, back to the.
You then get almost like a blank sheet, Johnny, that then has like no judgment and can actually take on board from a completely fresh perspective and do something maybe more interesting or more useful.
It took us a little while to realize what was happening to put things in place. So most people are driven, most of us today live in a poverty consciousness, scarcity, I'm buying stuff, I've got to get the better job, all that sort of stuff. So we are actually more driven, most of us are driven by our away from values. I don't want to be like my parents, I don't want to be like my dad. We're more energized, more focused, more driven by things that we don't want. This scarcity mentality. I don't want to be poor like my parents, so I'll work really hard for the rest of my life. When you start to let those shadows, those emotional events go, that energy comes back in. You've got more energy to focus on life today, and you also haven't got as many of those away from drivers. And that's the point. That's the time to start to put towards drivers in place. What do I really want to do? I spent 20 years as a coach, learning the classical model, the grow, the smart model. What's your outcome? How are you going to get there? How long is it going to take? Well, Joe Dispenza says, how can you can't create a new future if you're being held by your past. Mm-hmm. You're away from values. The problems that you had in your life that you can't remember, they're in your unconscious. There's no way you could, little millennial Johnny could bring up that original event at 1 year of age, but it comes out in his behavior. As I said, the boss comes in, little Johnny, his reaction, his behavior is to freeze, is to shrink. Now, most of us aren't aware of that. So when you start to bring this energy back into play, you're effectively a blank sheet, but you've got to make sure you put positive stuff in place. Yeah. And goal setting isn't enough. I mean, how many people write out their New Year's goals and put them on the shelf and right next to the ones they wrote last year?
Yeah, because they're still running with the same patterns. Yeah. And the motivation only lasts a certain amount of time.
Yeah. I mean, the big push for gyms is to get everyone to sign up in January because they know that 90% of them aren't going to be coming in February.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the goal setting that's to sort of get us away from where we don't want to be. So I want a better job. I want a better relationship because I don't want to be like my last relationship or like my parents who never got on or maybe got separated. If that's the driver to get a better relationship, it's not going to hold.
Yeah,
because you're in that poverty consciousness. So it's moving into a abundance consciousness.
Nice.
Where I don't need to go out and buy a new car. I can sit here right now and get the same feeling of being in a new car. Because you buy a new car, you get out and you save up, and that's your goal, and you get the new car. Once you've driven it once or twice, it's a car. And we're off onto another.
You remind me. My partner's just returned from Southeast Asia. Funny enough, I know you're in Myanmar, and she was in Cambodia and Laos. I think with two countries in particular. I know Vietnam obviously had a big impact on her as well. But one of the things she said, she took some wonderful photographs, had a wonderful, amazing 6 weeks traveling. She said, these people have absolutely nothing, and they are so happy.
When the coup happened in Myanmar, this is why they're earning, and I don't even think they're earning $40 a month now. The infrastructure broke down. And I question whether it would happen in Europe, in England. What happened was that literally the deliveries of fruit and vegetables from our country couldn't get to the city. And Yangon's 9 million people. It's not small, it's big. Mm. So what the farmers would do, and money became relatively useless. Now, this started 18 months ago. Today, it's no better, it's worse. So I'm not saying that this is sort of historical. This is going on right now, today. So the farmers, of course, they couldn't pay the workers. So what they were doing was they were taking the crops and they were taking them to the streets in Yangon, and they were saying, take what you want. That's how they live. It's just, the community, the family, it's, everything's one. That doesn't work in Europe. And that's something I think, especially men, I think in the West, but everybody in the West, we're struggling to hold on to that community. Well, it's sort of pretty much gone. And could you lock people up in their houses in Myanmar? It'd be a lot harder than doing it in England, where people just obeyed, the government said do this, so they did that. New Zealand is an interesting example because New Zealand had draconian things in place compared to England.
Yeah.
But she did it completely wrong. In England, it was, the government's done this and it's their fault. And what are they doing? And we're all glued to the TV watching what Boris Johnson's going to say next. Jacinda Ardern said, we're a team of 5 million. We all have to pull together to get over this. And so this is what we're going to put in place. I mean, the country was locked off to the rest of the world for a year.
Yeah.
No flights.
Yeah.
England. So she I don't I mean she was brilliant. She I don't know who advised her, but they were a team of 5 million, so they all pulled together.
The language that she used, yeah.
Yeah, so New Zealand's a Western country, obviously, but she's managing to bring back that community. And Asia, it's fantastic. I coached, as I said, I trained and I coached these guys that I said before, been overseas. But I think one of the things that we don't see in the West is that ripple effect of the coaching. But I had the opportunity to do that because I knew their families, their parents, their siblings, that so on. I could see the effect it was happening 3 or 4 layers out of the work that I was just doing with them, because you can't change other people. You change yourself. Be the example. Be the example you want to see in the world. Change yourself, and the people around you change.
I love that. Well, let's talk about books for a bit, because usually at this point in the conversation we talk about what's your favorite, therapy and non-therapy books. But I'd actually like to get a little bit more specific with you on this, because I'm absolutely loving this conversation. I would like to ask you, if you were to recommend a book to point people towards clean language, and a book that you would recommend, and I know obviously you're thinking about writing a book and you're going to be writing a book at some point, but and if you could point someone towards some content for the transurfing as well, because people will be listening to this and like going, oh, I hope he does a recommendation to point me in the right direction. Do one for each, and then we can talk about both.
I love working with sports people, because when you get a sports person into flow, the results are phenomenal. I worked with a rugby team in Somerset, and they were fifth division. They used to pay the ref a quid for his gas money, so nothing professional whatsoever. But we did a few exercises, and they started to run these exercises, and I remember at one of the games. So you have, they never got close to winning the division, but this was sort of the final promotion opportunity. We had 200 people on the sideline. Normally they had 3 of us, and I managed to come out of the state. They created this state of flow, which the other team couldn't deal with. When you have a team, rugby is a lot more physical and loud than football, but rugby, they went into silence, and they just literally slowly walked the team up the field. The audience, the crowd on the side, were in silence as well. They just got into this flow state. And if you can get into a flow state in sports, the other team doesn't, they don't know what to do, because you're just going through the motions.
You're working as one unit as well, aren't you? That's
15 people on the field is one.
Yeah.
You just can't. It's really hard to fight against that. So, and this is something you can use in business. If you can get into flow in your business day, 8 o'clock Monday morning, you've done your work by 3 o'clock.
Yeah.
We've got to go to the coffees, the water cooler, and have a chat about what was on Netflix last night. So we never really get into being able to concentrate to get into that flow, because we're so distracted. I work with one or two of the football academies, and I'm thinking, and I'm working with these teenagers, late or old teenagers moving into the sort of 1920, and I'm sort of going, you've got to be on the field for 80 minutes, and you sit here, and I can talk to you for 30 seconds, and then you've got to pick up your smartphones. Your attention spans are so short. But on the football field, you've got to, and they struggle with that.
Mm-hmm.
And so in business, if you're being able to concentrate, you can get so much more work done. But that's a real challenge. So how do you get a team, it's a sports team, into that sort of mindset? And I've done a bit of work with one of the rugby guys in New Zealand, and he put me onto a guy. I don't have a big library, but here's my first recommendation. What, you can't see it. It's Owen Eastwood's. I'll get it. It's Owen Eastwood's Belonging. Owen Eastwood worked with the New Zealand All Blacks team.
Yeah.
I think he's still working with the English football team as they go into Qatar, to the World Cup. He has, for the last couple of years, worked with them. His work is all around, how do you get the team bonded? And that book, Belonging, it's really effective. He talks about developing the culture. So we look about football in England, Manchester United, Alex Ferguson, he knew the families of all the players. He created that culture within the team. And I mean, we all know Manchester United because they went on to win so much. And from that, there was a little bit of a sort of a reflection with the other teams, Chelsea and Arsenal and Liverpool and that. So when these guys went into the English team, the golden era where we had some of the best football individuals in the world, but the national team was rubbish because they never got that culture of playing for England. So Owen Eastwood's book Belonging is about developing a culture in a team. So his is very much with the New Zealand All Blacks. It's about the country's culture. With the English football team, and they're starting to use it with the Scottish rugby team as well, and what it means to play for England. So on a company level, we go into a company and they have the vision on the wall behind us, which we sort of it's lip service. A company to actually really understand the culture of the company and what it means, and not what the boss tells me.
Yeah,
if it comes from somebody else, it's theirs, and we'll nod our heads and say yes. So that's helped me a lot with teams, understanding the dynamics. A coach on a football team will influence the culture hugely. How are they affecting it? They're going to affect it anyway. If they don't take control of it, they're not going to create a really good culture. Alex Ferguson did that with Manchester United. With a company, there's the CEO sit in the office at the top of the building and never come down. That management system they had years ago of walking around and actually meeting the employees. You meet someone, you might not know their name, but they'll remember that you came down and talked to them. That's going to get them more invested in the business. So that's a really effective book on sports, but also the culture that we can bring into companies.
Okay, tell us a little bit about Walking with Your Shadows.
Well, that's I'm doing this self-development course. It's a 6-month course that's very much about setting the positive vision towards values in place. But as Joe Dispenza says, you can't create a new future. You can't create goals and outcomes if you're being held by your past. And our shadows are the things that have happened to us in our life that have created the character. Now, we're not broken. Most of us are not broken. We don't need to go and see a therapist. And if you're in England and you do need to see a therapist, it's going to take you a year to get an appointment. So, and again, rather than looking for somebody else or looking for a doctor to give me a pill, we need to take this on ourselves. So walking with your shadow, it's shadow work. It's meditating, journaling, different techniques to start to notice your behaviors, the patterns that you run. So most of us, something happens, we get angry, we get annoyed. Our kiddie drops a glass and we shout at them. And then later we go, why did I do that? It's that unconscious reaction. It's a shadow. And shadows are part of us. But, today we're sort of, we try to be authentic, but we're only looking at the good things. We're not looking at the challenges that we've had in life that are mostly unconscious. So they're the things, our shadows that hang around in the background, not Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And they're not all negative. They're not all bad. If I was talking to somebody last week, actually, and they came up with a really interesting concept. We're moving into a time of the loss of the guru. If I admire somebody, if I'm putting somebody on a pedestal, like Tony Robbins is a good example, it's not them. They've got their own movie to run. I can only see in them things that are already within me. So if I could have access to the power, the mindset, the energy, the emotions to step on stage and get my message across to an audience, that'd be fantastic. But if I'm too shy, then I'm not going to. But if I can see it in Tony Robbins, then it's within me somewhere, unconsciously at the back.
Like that.
Shadow work goes to look at that. It looks at those negative, positive shadows that we deny, suppress. If we we have a breakup or we grieve over somebody, we call it heartbreak. It's held on that chakra point. And ultimately, if you're at a job you don't like, it's not like you sort of you put it off and it's okay. It slowly puts internal pressure on you till eventually your physiology breaks down. Most, I don't know the figures, but 60-70% of people in hospital are there because of lifestyle choices. They've had a shit job. They really hate the situation. It's really making them physically ill in the end, but they don't do anything about it because they're not brave enough, or they're not confident enough, or these are things that your doctor can't give you a pill for. They're shadows. You weren't born with a lack of confidence. You weren't born with a negative self-worth issue. You acquired it from somebody, from something, from an event.
Yeah, I would argue they do something about it, but then what they do is they go and stuff themselves full of carbohydrates and alcohol and wonder why they're now ill.
Absolutely, and alcohol or binge watching Netflix or whatever it is an addiction. Like smoking, there's a problem. A lot of these emotional events might just be below the surface, but we see it in the behaviors. So the person is not their behavior.
Yeah.
It's the way that the mind, so binge watching on Netflix, it's the way the unconscious, they can't deal with the problem because the unconscious can't think through process. It can't do the critical thinking. It has a problem. How do I alleviate it? Oh, if I smoke, it relaxes me. How many people, they just need the cigarette in the hand? It's actually distracting the unconscious. So the problem, it hasn't been dealt with. It's just been sort of suppressed. And then at 50 or 55, I have a heart attack because of the stress of a job I didn't like, or a relationship that didn't fulfill me, or whatever it is. We do that lifestyle.
Donuts they ate, yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so what is, in that case, I mean, this is going to be a fascinating answer in itself. What is your top tip? If you had to give one top tip for mental health right now, what would you say?
I meditate every day. No, I have an hour of power every day. I call it an hour of power. And there's a chunk of meditation in there. So 30, 40 minutes, depending on the day, I'll move it around. So I do a meditation, but on top of that, I'll listen to some positive podcast, or as I said before, Jordan Peterson, Tony Robbins, and there's so many really good just videos out there. Because we're growth centric. If we're not growing, we're dying. If a company's not increasing and developing, then it sort of gets nookie as a case in point. They stop growing, so they're not here today. So we're growth centric. It feeds our soul. It feeds our state of mind. So an hour of power, meditating, and that doesn't have to be sitting staring at a candle. That can be quite effective. I do Wim Hof as well.
Yep.
It's another really effective way of helping our physiology. Turn the television. I'm only going to give you 5. So turn the TV off. CNN, constant negative news. BBC. They keep your eyeballs on the screen with bad news. We had COVID, and then suddenly we're into the Ukraine, and then there's monkeypox, and well, I don't have radio, so I don't listen to it. The economy, or it's like this revolving door policy with the prime ministers. I can't affect it. If I'm going to get COVID, I'm going to get COVID. I'm personally not going to get COVID, but you might have that mindset that, it's this bug, so I'm going to hide away. So turn the media off, turn the TV off. How many programs are the most popular one in Asia? I'm not going to be able to remember it. Is about people killing each other. Hunger Games. It's about people killing each other. What are you vibrating at? You're working, and this is where transurfing comes in. Transurfing, quantum physics is about this vibration. And if you're in fear, if you're worried about the virus, if you're worried about the economy and your job, you're going to be vibrating at a lower level, at fear.
Yeah.
It's a mindset. Don't watch the media. Watch Jordan Peterson. He's a bit controversial, but at least he's given it millions of millennial or that sort of age group males a reason to live. I mean, he's been phenomenal. He's quite controversial, but for me, he's interesting because he gives me another perspective, and it's moving from I'm right and you're wrong to a more pluralistic, a more non-dual thinking. If I'm right and you're wrong, then we're always going to have separation. There's always going to be problems in the world. You have to move to that level. So listening to people that are giving me different perspectives, people that are giving me positive input, feeding my soul, learning stuff, growing, meditating, Wim Hof. That hour of power is really important for me and my wife. My wife does the same thing. Or we go out in the forest, and that's a walking meditation. So it doesn't have to be sitting watching a candle.
Yeah. I'm gonna do a self plug here. We've just created a fantastic guide for therapists and coaches called our top 10 tips for mental health, and they're all in there. Funnily enough, all the ones you mentioned, they're in our top 10. So and I'll put the link on the screen. But if you go to therapisttomillions.com, it'll be on there somewhere. So chance to get a little plug in there. Now, finally. Please, please, please tell us a fact or a joke, or I have a feeling you might be telling us a little story to win a Therapist to Millions t-shirt. But you have to model it like me. You have to, when you get it, you have to just send us a picture of yourself in whichever location you wish, and send it in for our gallery. Which is it going to be?
Wall, can't I?
You could do.
This story's a bit long, isn't it? Did you read the story? The story that I sent to you? It's about chicken and egg.
Yeah, you can read that one.
Einstein said we can't solve the problems with the same thinking that created them. So my story is, well, it actually happened to my mentor David Grove. He was the one that was developing clean language. So we sort of, he was telling the story. We were out walking in the English countryside a while ago, and we came across this egg lying in the grass. It was too hot and exposed to leave it there, so we took it to a secluded, so it was covered in grass, to a thicket of grass. So it got the shelter from the sun, from the protection from the rain, from the environment. And we sat a little way off having lunch, just having a picnic, discussing and trying to think about how we could change the thinking that we had on another thing that we were discussing. But the egg was safe under the trees. A little while later, we hear the egg in the thicket, in the grass, crying. And when we go over to it, it says it's lonely. So we take it out again and we put it between the branches of a tree where it can be with the birds. But then it's scared because it didn't feel safe up in the tree. These are egg type problems: being lonely, being scared. So we keep going. There's not a solution here for the egg. So we search around and we find a barn and an old hen sitting there. We put the egg under the hen, and then everything's all right for the egg. It's a chicken solution. It's a chicken solution for the egg. It's outside the egg boundaries. The egg had its boundaries. The grass was lonely. The tree, it was scary. It wasn't the egg that solved the problem. It was the chicken that solved the problem. So what we need is hen type worlds to solve chicken type problems. Sorry, chicken type worlds to solve egg type problems. Presenting goal-focused paradigms, conventional wisdom, as we said, the old method of the method of coaches use to goal set. This old paradigm, it'll transcend. Sorry, that the present paradigm tries to solve and transcend the issues, the problems of where the person is today. So where your client is today, you're using the resources, the thinking that got them here. Well, it got them from A to B, but it won't get them to C. So I'm trying to move a client directly to the goal, to B, to the new goal. They're not going to be able to do it because all this stuff comes up in between. It's stopping the client get to their goal. So what we need to do is to find chicken solutions for the egg problems. If all the problems are egg problems, then you're trying to solve them with egg solutions. Egg problems are not the chickens. But to find the chicken, you need to get far enough away from the egg. So A, where the client is, B, where they're going. You've got to get them out and around somewhere else so they can look back at where they are and where the goal is. So egg problems are going to be solved by chicken solutions, changing the thinking.
Nice.
That's my story.
I love it. That's great. That's wonderful. And finally, John, how can people get in contact with you, get hold of you, look at your work, see what you do in more detail?
The easiest thing to do is to go to Facebook and type in "walking with your shadow." I have a group on there, "Walking with Your Shadow."
Okay.
And that incorporates lots of the things we've talked about today. Goal setting, bits of transurfing slip into it, and shadow work as well.
Wonderful. Well, I'm certainly going to go there. I've already looked up transurfing. I've already started watching some of those, and they're absolutely fascinating. This is by far the longest podcast interview that we've done, but it's been absolutely fascinating. I've really enjoyed it. We've actually done it in two parts because I've actually had to have another call in between. I've been so determined that I didn't want to rush it. So thank you so much for your time. I think there's some absolute gold in today's conversation. Absolutely fascinating.
We haven't really talked about transurfing's funny. It's phenomenal, but it's really difficult to get into. But we haven't really talked about what I do. I deliver 6-month elite mentorship forum courses, which are really going in. The general stuff that that trainers do, the sort of the mastering your emotions, mastering your relationships. Goal setting was developed in the early part of the 20th century and hadn't really changed. And until I did this elite mentorship forum course, which introduces the real book behind the book. Napoleon Hill wrote Think and Grow Rich. We've all read it. But he wrote one before that for Henry Ford, and I'm going to forget the name of it, The Secret of Thinking. He wrote this book for Henry Ford, and Henry Ford said, "We can't release this. This is all our secrets. You can't do that." So Napoleon Hill came out a couple of years later with Think and Grow Rich, and now we've all read that. They only released this book in the early 90s. It was kept under wraps so much longer. So if you think you know it all because you've read Think and Grow Rich, there's a volume behind that, The Secret of Thinking by Napoleon Hill.
Nice.
Much bigger book. And I learned this on this elite mentorship forum course I do that. I'm starting one in February. There's 6 months, but we didn't even go into that part. So we could do another podcast.
We might. I think that's a really good idea. I'm already considering that. I said, well, we could get you back on.
Transurfing is it's difficult to get a grasp of transurfing unless you've done a lot of self-development work. So I did Tony Robbins 20 years ago. The Elite Mentorship Forum is I do that with Peter Sage. Peter Sage was one of his trainers. Phenomenal framework that Peter's got there. And there's a lot of NLP in it. Transurfing is the advanced work for me, for the way I see it. It's a little bit difficult to get into. The Mirror, Rene Garcia, who's delivered most of the stuff on YouTube, the videos. So transurfing, go to YouTube because it's hundreds of videos on there. Really goes into this stuff much more deeply, and it's we could just do a podcast about that.
Maybe we will.
Really interesting stuff.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for taking part in the show today. It really has been a fascinating discussion, and I really hope everyone gets as much out of it as I did. So I really appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
No problem. Thanks for having me, Damien.
If you enjoyed this week's episode of the Therapist to Millions podcast, may we invite you to check out our free for life Therapist to Millions online membership course for therapists and coaches who want to grow their business without trading more time for dollars. We've created the world's premier digital marketing resource exclusively for therapists, and it's yours for free for life. Just head over to therapisttomillions.com and sign up now.